Marcus Johnson had always been the troublemaker in his small hometown of Millbrook. At 25, he thought he knew everything about the world, especially after watching countless videos online about sovereign citizens and people who claimed they didn't have to follow regular laws. His friends often rolled their eyes when Marcus started talking about his theories, but they still hung around because he was fun to be with. On this particular sunny Tuesday morning, Marcus was driving his beat-up Honda Civic through the city center when he noticed something unusual. There were barriers set up along the main street, and police officers were directing traffic away from the usual route. Marcus could see fancy black cars lined up in the distance, and his curiosity got the better of him. "What's all this about?" he muttered to himself, pulling over to ask a nearby police officer. "Royal visit today, sir," the officer explained politely. "The Duke of Cambridge is visiting our city for a charity event. You'll need to take the detour around 5th Street. Marcus felt a surge of annoyance. Who did these royal people think? They were disrupting his normal route to work. He had grown up hearing stories from his grandfather about how America fought a war to get rid of kings and queens. And here they were, rolling out red carpets for British royalty. "This is America," Marcus said loudly to the officer. "We don't bow to kings here." The officer remained professional. "I understand, sir, but please follow the detour signs for everyone's safety." Instead of following the detour, Marcus decided to park his car and walk closer to see what all the fuss was about. He had heard that these royal visits cost taxpayers money, and he wanted to see for himself what his tax dollars were paying for. As he walked toward the barriers, he could see crowds of people lined up along the street, many holding small British and American flags. The atmosphere was festive, families bringing their children to catch a glimpse of real royalty. Local news crews had set up cameras and street vendors were selling commemorative items. Marcus shook his head in disgust. These people were acting like they were still living in medieval times, he thought, as he got closer to the main barrier. Marcus could see the impressive security setup. There were local police officers, federal agents in suits with earpieces, something he hadn't expected to see. Members of the Royal Protection Squad. These were the elite. British security officers who traveled with the royal family wherever they went. The Royal Protection Squad officers stood out from the local security. They wore dark suits and had an air of quiet professionalism that immediately caught Marcus's attention. These weren't just regular security guards. They were specially trained officers who had dedicated their lives to protecting members of the British royal family. Marcus watched as one of the royal protection officers, a tall man with graying hair and sharp eyes, surveyed the crowd methodically. The officer's name was Inspector David Hayes, though Marcus didn't know this at the time. Hayes had been protecting royals for over 15 years and had worked security details in dozens of countries around the world. Something about the way these officers carried themselves irritated Marcus even more. They seemed so serious, so important, like they thought they were better than everyone else. In Marcus's mind, they represented everything he disliked about authority and class systems. "Excuse me, Marcus," called out to Inspector Hayes, walking up to the barrier. "I need to get through here. I work on this street." Hayes looked at Marcus. Calmly, "I'm sorry, sir, but this area is closed for security reasons. The event will be over in about 2 hours, and then you can access your workplace." 2 hours? Marcus's voice rose. "I can't wait 2 hours just because some fancy prince wants to visit. This is my city, my street. I have rights." Hayes maintained. His professional demeanor, "I understand your frustration, sir, but I'm sure you can appreciate that security is our top priority today. There are alternative routes you can take." But Marcus wasn't listening to reason. The combination of his natural rebellious streak, his dislike of authority, and his belief that he was being treated unfairly was building up inside him like pressure in a steam kettle. Looked around at all the other people who were patiently waiting behind the barriers and felt like they were all sheep, just following orders without question. "You know what?" Marcus said, his voice getting louder. "I don't recognize your authority here. You're not even American police. You can't tell me where I can and can't go in my own country." Inspector Hayes had dealt with difficult people before, but something in Marcus's tone suggested this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. He signaled subtly to his colleague, Inspector Sarah Mitchell, who moved closer to provide backup if needed. "Sir, I'm asking you politely to step back from us." "The barrier," Hayes said firmly, but not aggressively. "We don't want any trouble today." That phrase, "we don't want any trouble," was like waving a red flag in front of Marcus. In his mind, it sounded like a threat, and Marcus Johnson had never backed down from what he perceived as a threat. In his entire life, the crowd around them was starting to notice the tension. Parents pulled their children a little closer, and some people began recording with their phones. Sensing that something interesting was about to happen, the local news crews, always hungry for a good story, began to point their cameras in Marcus's direction. Marcus looked directly at Inspector Hayes and made a decision that would change his life forever. He decided that today was the day he was going to make a stand against what he saw as foreign authority on American soil. He had no idea that he was about to mess with some of the most highly trained security professionals in the world. The stage was set for a confrontation that would become legendary among security professionals and serve as a cautionary tale for years to come. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped closer to the barrier, his chest puffed out with false confidence. "I'm going through this barrier," he announced loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "And there's nothing you British boys can do to stop me." Inspector Hayes remained calm, but his years of training kicked in immediately. He could read people like books. Marcus was displaying all the classic signs of someone who was about to do something stupid. Hayes had seen this type before. People who confused being loud with being right, who thought that making a scene would somehow prove their point. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to step back," Hayes said. His voice still controlled, but carrying a new edge of authority. "If you attempt to breach this security perimeter, you will be detained." Marcus laughed, but it was a nervous laugh that didn't match his brave words. "Detained by who? You? You're not even a real cop here. You're just some foreign bodyguard playing dress-up." The crowd was growing larger now, with people stopping their morning routines to watch the drama unfold. Some were taking videos with their phones, while others were shaking their heads at Marcus's behavior. A few local police officers were moving closer, ready to assist if needed. Inspector Mitchell, Hayes' partner, spoke up for the first time. "Sir, we are authorized to operate here by your federal government and local authorities. We have full legal authority to maintain this security perimeter." But Marcus was beyond listening to reason. The attention from the crowd was feeding his ego, and he felt like he was finally taking a stand for something important. In his mind, he wasn't just fighting for his right to walk down a street, he was fighting for American independence. All over again. "Watch this, everyone," Marcus called out to the crowd. "Watch how these foreign agents treat American citizens." Before anyone could react, Marcus grabbed the metal barrier with both hands and started to climb over it. It wasn't a high barrier, maybe 4 feet tall, but the moment his foot touched the other side, everything changed. Inspector Hayes moved with speed that surprised everyone watching. In one fluid motion, he was beside Marcus, and before Marcus knew what was happening, he found himself face down on the ground with his arms pinned behind his back. The entire takedown took less than 3 seconds. "What the hell?" Marcus shouted, his face pressed against the asphalt. "Get off me. This is assault. Everyone's watching. You can't do this." But Hayes wasn't rough or aggressive. His movements were precise and professional, designed to control without causing unnecessary harm. This was exactly the kind of situation he had trained for thousands of times. "You are being detained for breaching a federal security perimeter," Hayes said calmly as he secured Marcus with zip-tie restraints. "You have the right to remain silent." Marcus struggled against the restraints, but it was useless. Hayes had positioned him in a way that made resistance impossible without Marcus hurting himself. The crowd was now openly staring and recording, but not with the sympathy Marcus had expected. Many were shaking their heads in disapproval at his behavior. "This is kidnapping," Marcus yelled. "I'm an American citizen. You can't arrest me." Inspector Mitchell approached with several local police officers who had been watching the entire incident. "Actually, sir," she said with a slight British accent that made Marcus even angrier, "you just committed a federal crime. Breaching a security perimeter during a diplomatic visit is taken very seriously." One of the local officers, Sergeant Rodriguez, knelt down beside Marcus. "Son, what were you thinking? These officers gave you every chance to walk away." Marcus tried to turn his head to look at the sergeant. "They're not real police. They're foreign agents. They can't arrest Americans." Sergeant Rodriguez sighed. "Son, they absolutely can. They're here under diplomatic immunity and federal authorization. They have more authority right now than I do." This was not how Marcus had imagined this would go. In his mind, he would climb over the barrier, the crowd would cheer for his brave stand against foreign authority, and somehow the media would pick up his story as an example of American patriotism. Instead, he was lying on the ground in restraints, while people recorded his humiliation. Inspector Hayes stood up and brushed off his suit, barely even breathing hard. "Transport?" he asked Mitchell. "Federal agents are on their way," she replied. "ETA 3 minutes. Marcus's mind was racing. Federal agents? This was escalating way beyond what he had expected. Wait, he said, his voice losing some of its earlier bravado. "Can't we just talk about this? I was just trying to get to work." Hayes looked down at him with an expression that wasn't unkind, but wasn't sympathetic either. "You had multiple opportunities to simply walk away, sir. You chose to escalate this situation at every turn." A black SUV pulled up, and 2 men in suits got out. They had badges hanging from their necks and the serious demeanor of federal law enforcement. Marcus's stomach dropped as he realized this. Wasn't just going to be a quick trip to the local police station. "Special Agent Thompson, FBI," one of the men said, showing his badge to Hayes. "We'll take it from here." As the federal agents helped Marcus to his feet and guided him toward their vehicle, he looked back at the crowd. Some people were still recording, but most had already started to disperse, their interest waning now that the excitement was over. "This isn't over?" Marcus called out, though he wasn't sure who he was talking to. "Everyone saw what happened here. This is a violation of my constitutional rights." But his words fell on deaf ears. Inspector Hayes was already back at his post, scanning the crowd for other potential threats, as if nothing had happened. Inspector Mitchell was speaking quietly into her radio, probably reporting the incident to her superiors. As the SUV drove away with Marcus in the back seat, he started to realize that he might have made a serious mistake. The federal agents weren't engaging with his protests about his rights or the legitimacy of the Royal Protection Squad's authority. They were treating this as a straightforward case of someone breaking federal law. The royal visit continued without any further incidents. The Duke of Cambridge never even knew that someone had tried to breach the security perimeter. To him and his staff, it was just another successful public appearance in a long series of international visits. But for Marcus Johnson, sitting in the back of a federal vehicle heading toward downtown holding facilities, this was just the beginning of what would turn out to be the worst week of his life. The federal holding facility was nothing like the local jail Marcus had imagined he might end up in. This was a serious place with serious people, and everyone treated his case as if he had threatened national security. Marcus sat in a small, sterile room with concrete walls and a metal table. Still wearing the clothes he had put on that morning when his biggest worry was being late for work. Special Agent Thompson sat across from him with a thick folder and a digital recorder. "Mr. Johnson, you're being charged under Section 1752 of federal law. Knowingly entering a restricted area where the Secret Service is operating during a special event of national significance." Marcus stared at him. Special event of national significance? It was just some British guy visiting. "The Duke of Cambridge represents the British Crown," Thompson explained patiently. "His visit was coordinated at the highest levels between our governments. The security arrangements were established under international diplomatic protocols. But I'm an American citizen," Marcus insisted, though his voice had lost the aggressive edge it had earlier. "I have constitutional rights. Those British agents had no right to put their hands on me." Thompson pulled out several documents from his folder. "Actually, Mr. Johnson, they had every right. The Royal Protection Squad operates under a special agreement between the United States and the United Kingdom. When they're protecting British royals on American soil, they have full law enforcement authority backed by both our governments." Marcus felt his stomach sink as Thompson continued reading from the documents. "Furthermore, You were warned multiple times by both British and American law enforcement to stay back. You chose to ignore those warnings and physically breach a federal security perimeter. This isn't about your constitutional rights. This is about you breaking federal law in front of multiple witnesses and cameras. The reality of his situation was starting to hit Marcus like a cold wave. What kind of trouble am I looking at here? Thompson's expression remained neutral. Section 1752 violations can carry up to 10 years in federal prison if the breach occurs. During a special event involving foreign dignitaries, you're also looking at charges for resisting arrest and interfering with federal agents in the performance of their duties. Marcus's hand started shaking. 10 years? For climbing over a barrier? That's insane. I didn't hurt anyone. I was just trying to make a point. The law doesn't care about your motivations, Mr. Johnson. It only cares about your actions. While Marcus was learning about federal law the hard way, word of his arrest was already spreading through his hometown. Someone in the crowd had uploaded the video of his takedown to social media, and it was getting attention for all the wrong reasons. The video showed Marcus climbing over the barrier, then being expertly subdued by Inspector Hayes in a matter of seconds. What made it particularly embarrassing for Marcus was how professional and restrained the British officer had been. While Marcus appeared loud, aggressive, foolish, his co-workers at the auto parts store where he worked were watching the video during their lunch break. "Can you believe Marcus did this?" said Tony, his supervisor. "I knew he had some weird ideas about government, but this is crazy." Sarah, the store's assistant manager, shook her head as she watched the video. Look how calm that British officer is. Marcus is screaming and carrying on, but the officer barely seems bothered. It's like he deals with idiots like this every day. The comments on the social media posts were brutal, instead of the support Marcus had expected for taking a stand. Against foreign authority, people were mocking him for picking a fight he couldn't win. "Dude thought he was going to take on the Royal Guard and became a meme instead," wrote one commenter. "That takedown was smooth as butter." "These British officers don't mess around," wrote another. "Play stupid games, win stupid prizes," was one. Of the most liked comments back in the holding facility, Marcus was meeting with a public defender named Jennifer Walsh. She was a competent lawyer, but she looked tired as she reviewed his case file. "Mr. Johnson, I'm going to be completely honest with you," she said, sitting down across from him. "This is not a good situation. The government has video evidence of you breaking federal law, multiple witnesses, and clear documentation that you were warned repeatedly before you chose to act." Marcus leaned forward desperately. "But can't we argue that those British officers didn't have the right to arrest me? This is America." Walsh sighed. "You could try that argument, but it would fail. The Royal Protection Squad's authority here is well established in law. They weren't acting as foreign agents. They were acting as authorized law enforcement under international agreements that have been tested in courts many times. So what are my options?" "Honestly, your best option is probably to plead guilty and hope for a reduced sentence. If we go to trial, the prosecution has an airtight case, and judges don't look kindly on people who disrupt diplomatic visits." Marcus put his head in his hands. This was spiraling out of control so fast that he couldn't keep up. That morning, he had been a regular guy with a regular job and regular problems. Now he was facing years in federal prison. "There's something else you should know," Walsh continued. "The media is starting to pick up this story. The video of your arrest is going viral, and not in a way that's sympathetic to you." She showed him her phone, where news websites were running headlines like "Local Man Learns Hard Lesson About Messing with Royal Guard and Americans' Failed Attempt to Breach Royal Security Backfire Spectacularly." One article included an interview with a security expert who explained exactly why Marcus's approach had been so foolish. "The Royal Protection Squad are among the most highly trained security professionals in the world," the expert said. "They protect people whose lives are constantly under threat from serious criminals and terrorists. Someone like this gentleman was never going to pose a real challenge to them." Marcus felt humiliated reading about himself being described as no threat at all to the officers he had tried to confront. His phone had been returned to him for the meeting with his lawyer, and he could see dozens of missed calls and messages. His mother had called 6 times, His ex-girlfriend had texted asking if he had lost his mind, and his boss had left a voicemail that he was afraid to listen to. Johnson Walsh said gently, "I know this seems overwhelming right now, but we need to focus on damage control. The more we can show that you understand the seriousness of what you did and that you're genuinely remorseful, the better chance we have of getting a reasonable plea deal." Marcus nodded weakly, but inside he was still struggling to accept that his grand gesture of defiance had turned into such a complete disaster. He had wanted to be seen as a patriot standing up for American values, but instead he was becoming known as the guy who got owned by British security in 3 seconds flat. 3 days after his arrest, Marcus was released on bail, but his problems were just beginning. The video of his confrontation with Inspector Hayes had exploded across the internet, and he was discovering what it meant to become an unwilling internet celebrity. His neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was watering her garden when he pulled into his driveway. She had always been friendly before, but now she just stared at him with a mixture of curiosity and disappointment. "Marcus," she called out as he walked toward his front door, "I saw you on the news. What were you thinking?" Marcus kept his head down. "It's complicated, Mrs. Chen." "Oh, it's not complicated," she replied firmly. "You embarrassed our whole neighborhood. That British officer was just doing his job, and you acted like a fool." Inside his house, Marcus found 17 voicemails waiting for him. The first few were from friends and family, expressing concern and confusion. The middle ones were from reporters wanting interviews. The last few were from his boss at the auto parts store. "Marcus, this is Tony," his supervisor's voice said on the recording. "I don't know what got into you, but we can't have someone who's facing federal charges working here. Corporate says you're suspended without pay until this gets resolved." "I'm sorry, man, but my hands are tied." Marcus sank into his couch and stared at the ceiling. In 3 days, he had gone from being a regular guy with a steady job to being unemployed, facing federal charges, becoming a laughingstock on the internet. His phone buzzed with a text from his younger sister, Saw. "The video. Mom is crying. She's embarrassed to leave the house. Why did you do this to our family?" That message hit harder than all the legal troubles. Marcus had always been the rebellious one in his family, but he had never meant to hurt his mother or sister. They were good people who worked hard and followed the rules. And now they were dealing with the fallout from his moment of stupidity. Meanwhile, Inspector Hayes was back in London, writing his report on the incident. For him, it was just another day at the office, though he did find it somewhat amusing that the encounter had generated so much attention online. Sir David, his colleague Inspector Mitchell, said, looking at her laptop, "You've become quite famous. There are compilation videos of security takedowns, and yours is featured prominently." Hayes glanced at the screen and shook his head with a slight smile. Poor fellow. I almost felt sorry for him. Clearly had no idea what he was getting himself into. "The American media is treating it as a teaching moment," Mitchell continued. "There are articles about respecting law enforcement and understanding international diplomatic protocols. Aren't even using it to explain how royal protection works." Back in America, legal experts were indeed using Marcus's case as an educational opportunity. Professor Janet Williams from the University of Law was giving interviews about international law enforcement cooperation. "What people need to understand," she explained to a local news reporter, "is that when foreign dignitaries visit the United States, their security details operate with full legal authority. This isn't unusual or controversial. It's standard practice that we've followed for decades." Mr. Johnson's belief that these officers had no authority was simply incorrect. The reporter asked, "But don't American citizens have rights when it comes to foreign law enforcement?" "Absolutely," Professor Williams replied. "But those rights don't include the right to break federal law or breach security perimeters." Mr. Johnson wasn't arrested for expressing his opinions. He was arrested for his actions. Marcus watched this interview from his living room, eating cereal for dinner because he couldn't afford to buy groceries after losing his job. Hearing legal experts calmly explain why he was wrong made him feel even worse about the whole situation. His public defender called with an update on his case. "The prosecutor is offering a plea deal," Jennifer Walsh told him over the phone. 6 months in federal minimum security prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation, plus community service and a fine. 6 months in prison? Marcus felt his heart racing for climbing over a barrier. Marcus, you need to understand something, Walsh said patiently. This could have been much worse. The maximum sentence for what you did is 10 years. The prosecutor is being relatively lenient because you don't have a serious criminal record and because the incident ended without anyone getting hurt. What if we go to trial? Damn, you're gambling with your future. If we lose at trial, which is likely given the evidence against you, you could face the full 10 years. Federal judges don't like people who waste the court's time with unwinnable cases. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, trying to process his options. How long do I have to decide? 2 weeks? But Marcus, I strongly recommend you take this deal. It's probably the best offer you're going to get. After hanging up, Marcus walked to his bathroom and looked at himself in the mirror. The man staring back at him looked tired and defeated. His hair was messy, he had bags under his eyes, and he had lost weight from stress and not eating properly. He thought about Inspector Hayes, who had probably forgotten about him entirely by now. The British officer had handled the situation with such professionalism and calm that it made Marcus's own behavior look even more childish in comparison. Marcus pulled out his phone and, against his better judgment, searched for more videos of the incident. There are now dozens of them, with titles like Royal Guard shows, American protester, whose boss, and this is why you don't mess with British security. The comments were getting worse, not better. People were sharing the video in Facebook groups and Reddit threads, always with mocking commentary about Americans who think they know everything about law enforcement. One comment that particularly stung read, "This guy probably watches too many movies where the regular guy takes on the system and wins. Reality check. Trained professionals are trained professionals for a reason." Another comment said, "Love how he thought he was going to be some kind of hero, but he just became a cautionary tale about picking battles you can't win." Marcus closed his phone and sat in his dark living room, contemplating how his life had changed so dramatically in just a few days. He was starting to realize that his actions hadn't just affected him, they had affected his family, his reputation, and his future in ways he had never considered. The worst part was that he was beginning to understand that the internet never forgets, and this video would probably follow him for the rest of his life. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in federal court wearing a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit him properly. His mother sat in the gallery behind him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She had aged 10 years in the past month, and Marcus knew it was his fault. Judge Patricia Morrison was known for being tough, but fair. She had been on the federal bench for 15 years and had seen every type of defendant imaginable. As she reviewed Marcus's case file, her expression was stern, but not unkind. "Mr. Johnson," she said, looking at him over her reading glasses, "you've agreed to plead guilty to violating Section 1752 of federal law. Do you understand the charges against you?" Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes, Your Honor. And do you understand that by pleading guilty, you're admitting that you knowingly entered a restricted federal security area despite being warned multiple times by law enforcement officers?" "Your Honor." Judge Morrison set down the file and looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Johnson, I've watched the video of this incident. I've read the police reports, reviewed your background. Help me understand what you were thinking that day." Marcus had practiced this moment with his lawyer dozens of times, but standing in front of a federal judge made his mind go blank. "Your Honor, I thought I was standing up for something important. I thought those officers didn't have the right to tell Americans where they could go in their own country. And now? What do you think now?" Marcus took a shaky breath. "I think I was wrong, Your Honor. I think I was ignorant about how the law actually works, and I think I acted like an idiot in front of everyone, including my family." Judge Morrison nodded slightly. "The Royal Protection Squad officers showed remarkable restraint in dealing with you. They could have used much more force, but they didn't. They gave you every opportunity to walk away peacefully, but you chose escalation at every turn." "I know, Your Honor. I realize that now. Mr. Johnson, do you have any idea what these officers deal with on a regular basis?" They protect people whose lives are constantly threatened by terrorists, assassins, and dangerous criminals. When someone breaches their security perimeter, they have to assume the worst until proven otherwise. Marcus shook his head. I never thought about it that way, Your Honor. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Let me tell you something about Inspector Hayes, the officer who detained you. Last year, he prevented an actual assassination attempt on a member of the royal family during a visit to France. 3 months before your incident, he helped stop a terrorist attack at a royal event in Germany. This man puts his life on the line regularly to protect others, and you treated him like he was your enemy. Marcus felt tears starting to form in his eyes. He had never considered the bigger picture, never thought about what these officers actually faced in their daily work. Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice cracking, I want to apologize. Not just for breaking the law, but for being so disrespectful to people who were just doing their jobs. I was wrong about everything. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney, Sarah Chen, stood up to address the court. Your Honor, while we appreciate Mr. Johnson's remorse, we must emphasize that this type of behavior cannot be tolerated. Diplomatic visits are carefully coordinated events that require the highest levels of security. Mr. Johnson's actions could have had serious consequences. Judge Morrison nodded. I agree, Ms. Chen. However, I also believe in redemption and learning. From mistakes, she turned back to Marcus. Mr. Johnson, I'm going to accept your guilty plea, but I'm modifying the sentence recommendation. Marcus's lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, tensed up beside him. Modifications could go either way. Instead of 6 months in federal prison, Judge Morrison continued. I'm sentencing you to 4 months in minimum security detention, followed by 18 months of supervised probation. Additionally, you will perform 200 hours of community service, specifically working with programs that educate young people about respecting law enforcement and understanding civic responsibility. Marcus almost collapsed with relief. For months instead of 6 might not sound like much, but in his situation, every day mattered. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm ordering you to write a formal letter of apology to Inspector Hayes and the Royal Protection Squad, to be delivered through official diplomatic channels. You will also attend anger management counseling and complete a course on constitutional law and federal law enforcement authority. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor. Judge Morrison's expression softened slightly. Mr. Johnson, you're 25 years old. You have most of your life ahead of you. Don't let one moment of poor judgment define the rest of your story. Use this experience to become a better person and a better citizen. After the hearing, Marcus hugged his mother in the courthouse. Hallway, she was crying, but they were tears of relief now rather than shame. I'm so sorry, Mom, Marcus whispered. I'm going to make this right. I'm going to be better. I know you will, honey, she replied, holding him tight. I know you will. Outside the courthouse, there were still a few reporters waiting, hoping to get a statement from Marcus. His lawyer had advised him to say nothing. But Marcus felt like he owed the public something after all the attention his case had received. I just want to say, he told the small group of reporters that I was wrong. I was completely wrong about everything. Inspector Hayes and his colleagues were professional and respectful, and I treated them terribly. I hope people can learn from my mistake and not make the same error as I did. One reporter asked, Do you regret trying to stand up for what you believed in? Marcus thought carefully before answering. I regret the way I went about it. I regret not listening when multiple people tried to help me understand the situation. I regret embarrassing my family and my community. Standing up for your beliefs is important, but you have to do it the right way. You have to make sure your beliefs are actually based on facts, not just anger or ignorance. As Marcus walked away from the courthouse, he felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. He had a long road ahead of him, but for the first time since this whole ordeal began, he felt like he might be able to rebuild his life and his reputation. The viral video would always be out there, but maybe someday it would be remembered not just as an example of someone making a stupid mistake, but as a story about someone who learned from that mistake and became better because of it. 6 months after his release from federal detention, Marcus Johnson was a different person. The 4 months in minimum security facility had been difficult but transformative. He had used the time to read, reflect, and genuinely understand the gravity of what he had done. His cellmate during those months was an older man named Robert who had been convicted of tax evasion. Robert had become something of a mentor to Marcus, helping him see his situation from new perspectives. The thing about making a public mistake, Robert had told him one evening, is that you get a choice. You can spend the rest of your life being bitter about the consequences, or you can use it as motivation to become someone better. Marcus had chosen the latter path. Now, standing in front of a group of high school students at Jefferson High School, Marcus was sharing his story as part of his community service requirement. But what had started as court-ordered speaking engagements had evolved into something much more meaningful. So there I was, Marcus told the students, face down on the pavement in zip-tie handcuffs. With my grand moment of rebellion lasting exactly 3 seconds, some of the students chuckled, but Marcus's expression remained serious. I thought I was being a patriot. I thought I was standing up for American values. But what I was really doing was embarrassing myself, my family, and my community, because I was too stubborn to listen and too ignorant to understand the law. A student in the front row raised her hand. "Mr. Johnson, do you think the officers were too harsh with you?" Marcus shook his head firmly. "Not at all." Inspector Hayes showed incredible restraint. "He could have hurt me badly, but he didn't. He did exactly what he was trained to do: neutralize a potential threat with the minimum force necessary. I was the one who escalated the situation at every opportunity." After his presentation, Marcus drove to his new job at a nonprofit organization that helped recently released federal inmates reintegrate into society. It wasn't glamorous work, and it paid much less than his old job at the auto parts store. It was meaningful in ways his previous work had never been. His supervisor, Maria Santos, greeted him as he walked into the office. "How did the school presentation go?" "Really well," Marcus replied. "I think the kids understood the message. A few of them came up afterward to ask questions about making better choices." Maria smiled. "You know, when the judge first ordered you to do these community service presentations, I wasn't sure how effective they would be. But you've turned into one of our best speakers. The schools keep requesting you specifically." It was true. Marcus had discovered that his story resonated with young people in ways that traditional authority figures couldn't match. He wasn't a police officer or a teacher lecturing them about following rules. It was someone close to their age who had made a spectacular mistake and could explain exactly why it was such a bad idea. That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table working on something that had taken him months to get right: his letter of apology to Inspector Hayes. The judge had ordered him to write it, but Marcus wanted it to be perfect. He had written dozens of drafts, each one helping him understand his actions better. "Dear Inspector Hayes," the final version began, "I am writing to offer you a sincere and heartfelt apology for my behavior during the royal visit 6 months ago. I know that a simple letter cannot undo the disrespect I showed you and your colleagues, but I hope it can at least demonstrate that I have learned from my mistakes. I now understand that you and your team were not foreign agents trying to suppress American rights, as I foolishly believed at the time. You were highly trained professionals doing an incredibly difficult and dangerous job, protecting people whose lives are constantly at risk from real threats. My actions that day were not patriotic or brave. They were ignorant and selfish. I have spent the past months learning about the work that royal protection officers do around the world. I know now that you have prevented actual assassination, attempts, and terrorist attacks. You put your life on the line regularly to protect others. I treated you like an enemy when you were simply doing your duty with professionalism and restraint. I am deeply sorry for the disruption I caused, for the disrespect I showed, and for the additional stress I added to what was already a high-pressure situation. You handled everything perfectly, and I handled everything terribly. I hope that someday I can prove through my actions that I have become a better person because of this experience. Thank you for your patience and professionalism, even when dealing with someone who deserved neither. With sincere regret and respect, Marcus Johnson." The next day, Marcus received a phone call that surprised him. It was Jennifer Walsh, his former public defender. "Marcus, I have some interesting news," she said. "I just got a call from the British Embassy. Inspector Hayes received your letter." Marcus's heart started racing. Oh no. Is he upset? Does he want to press additional charges or something? Jennifer laughed. Quite the opposite. He asked the embassy to pass along a message to you, he said, and I quote, "Mr. Johnson's letter demonstrates genuine growth and understanding. I respect his willingness to take responsibility for his actions and his efforts to educate others. I wish him well in his continued rehabilitation." Marcus had to sit down. He had never expected any response to his letter, let alone such a gracious one. "There's more," Jennifer continued. "The embassy mentioned that Inspector Hayes occasionally gives lectures about international security cooperation. He's been using your case as an example, not to mock you, but to show how situations can be de-escalated when all parties act professionally. Even after what I did to him, he's being professional about it. That's exactly the point, Marcus. You've learned something important about what real professionalism looks like." 6 months later, Marcus was invited to speak at a law enforcement conference about his experience from the civilian perspective. As he walked into the hotel conference room, he was nervous but determined to share what he had learned. The audience was filled with police officers, federal agents, and security professionals from around the world. And there, sitting in the third row, was Inspector David Hayes. Their eyes met across the room, and Hayes gave Marcus a small, respectful nod. It wasn't forgiveness that would take more time, but it was acknowledgement that people can change and grow from their mistakes. Marcus walked to the podium and began his presentation. "My name is Marcus Johnson, and 18 months ago, I made one of the stupidest decisions of my life. I tried to mess with the Royal Guard, and it was without question a big mistake." The audience chuckled, but Marcus could see that they were listening intently. "I'm here today not to make excuses for what I did, but to help you understand how someone can go from being a regular citizen to making such a poor choice, and hopefully to help prevent others from making the same mistake." As Marcus told his story, he noticed Inspector Hayes taking notes. After the presentation, Hayes approached him. "Mr. Johnson," Hayes said, extending his hand, "that was a very honest and insightful presentation." Marcus shook his hand, still amazed by the man's professionalism. "Inspector Hayes, I can't tell you how sorry I am for that day." "I know you are," Hayes replied. "But more importantly, you've used the experience to help others. That's admirable."
"Can
I ask you something?" Marcus said. "That day when you took me down so quickly, was that just training, or was I really that easy to handle?" Hayes smiled slightly. "Mr. Johnson, with respect, you telegraphed your intentions from 50 meters away. You were angry, loud, and predictable. Any properly trained officer would have handled the situation the same way." Marcus laughed, but it wasn't bitter. "I really had no idea what I was getting myself into, did I?" "No," Hayes said kindly, "but you've learned from it. That's what matters now." As Marcus drove home that evening, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. The viral video was still out there, and probably always would be. But now when people shared it, many of the comments were different. "This guy actually learned from his mistake and became a better person," read one recent comment. "Respect for turning a stupid moment into a teaching opportunity," read another. Marcus Johnson would never be famous for the right reasons, but he had managed to transform his moment of infamy into something positive. He had learned that real strength isn't about confronting authority, or proving you can't be pushed around. It's about admitting when you're wrong, taking responsibility for your actions, and working to become better. And sometimes that's enough to turn even the biggest mistake into something meaningful.